He said it like a punchline, leaning back with careless confidence, his laughter echoing faintly off the pristine white walls of the private clinic. The room looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a medical facility. Polished marble floors, soft ambient lighting, a faint scent of antiseptic mixed with expensive cologne. He hadn't even removed his tailored jacket. The fabric hugged his shoulders like armor, a reminder of who he was and what he owned. "I'll give you 1 million if you cure me." The millionaire laughed, waving his hand as if he were offering spare change, not a sum that could change lives. To him, the words meant nothing. They were a defense mechanism, a way to mock the fear gnawing at him from the inside. He had spent years buying solutions, doctors flown in from Europe, experimental treatments whispered about in elite circles, pills that promised relief but delivered only temporary silence. Yet every night, when the city lights dimmed and the world slowed, the pain returned, pressing against his chest like a quiet warning. He hated those moments most, because money could not distract him then. The woman standing across from him did not react the way others usually did. She didn't widen her eyes or laugh nervously. She didn't reassure him with false optimism or shrink under the weight of his name. She simply studied him, her gaze steady, her posture calm. She asked him to sit down. That alone irritated him. People usually obeyed him, not the other way around. Still, something in her voice, firm but not cold, made him comply. As he sat, he noticed her hands, steady, practiced, unadorned by jewelry. Not the hands of someone impressed by wealth. She asked him to describe the pain, not dramatically, not vaguely, but honestly. At first, he exaggerated, half expecting sympathy, half expecting dismissal. Instead, she asked follow-up questions, precise ones, as if each answer mattered. Slowly, without realizing it, he began to speak differently. He mentioned the pressure, the timing, the fear that crept in when he was alone. He stopped laughing. The joke had lost its power. The machines nearby hummed softly, indifferent witnesses to a moment he hadn't planned. When she finally spoke, she didn't promise a miracle. She didn't challenge his offer or flatter his ego. She told him the truth, that his condition was serious, that many before her had failed, and that there were no guarantees. But she also said something unexpected, that she believed the body often suffered because the person carrying it refused to listen. The words unsettled him more than any diagnosis ever had. He wanted to dismiss them, to stand up and leave, to remind her who he was. Yet he stayed. As the consultation ended, she outlined a plan, not a dramatic intervention, but a process. Time, discipline, trust. He scoffed lightly, masking the unease rising in his chest. Trust was not something he invested in easily. As he stood to leave, he glanced back at her, expecting one last look of awe or ambition. There was none. She was already making notes, focused, as if his presence were just another responsibility, not a privilege. Outside, the city roared as usual, cars, voices, ambition colliding in endless motion. He slipped into his car, the door closing with a soft, expensive thud, sealing him back into his world of control. Yet something had shifted. The laughter from earlier felt hollow now, echoing in his mind without humor. For the first time in years, the million-dollar joke lingered like a question rather than a boast. That night, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, the pain did not come as fiercely as before. Instead, another sensation took its place, a quiet, uncomfortable awareness that maybe, just maybe, the impossible wasn't mocking him anymore. The second phase of his treatment did not begin with machines or needles, but with rules, and that alone felt like an insult to a man who had built his empire on bending them. He arrived at the clinic one morning expecting scans, tests, something dramatic enough to justify his time, and instead found a printed schedule waiting for him. Sleep hours, meal times, breathing exercises, walking, silence. He stared at the paper as if it were a bad joke, then looked up at her, ready to laugh it off. She didn't flinch. She told him his body was exhausted from years of command, that even his heart had learned to obey stress before it obeyed rest. He wanted to argue, to remind her of his board meetings that ran past midnight, of the deals that required constant vigilance, but the words stayed lodged in his throat. Against his instincts, he followed the plan. At first, he treated it like a temporary inconvenience, something he would endure until the real medicine began. Yet days passed, and something unexpected happened. The pain, once sharp and unpredictable, began to change. It still visited him, but less aggressively, like a warning rather than an attack. What unsettled him more was the silence. Without constant calls, without assistants hovering, without numbers flashing across screens, he was left alone with his thoughts, and they were louder than any boardroom. During their sessions, she asked questions that had nothing to do with symptoms. She asked when he had last felt genuinely calm. He couldn't remember. She asked what he feared most if he lost everything. He joked at first, saying he would simply rebuild, but his voice lacked conviction. She waited. The silence pressed on him until the truth surfaced. He feared being irrelevant, unseen, unloved once the money no longer spoke for him. Saying it out loud made his chest tighten in a way no painkiller ever had. She listened without judgment, nodding slowly, as if he had just described something entirely ordinary. She told him stress was not only a condition of the mind, but a habit of the soul, one that could slowly poison even the strongest body. Weeks went by. He started waking before his alarm, breathing deeply instead of gasping. He began to notice the taste of food, the warmth of sunlight on his skin during prescribed walks. These small sensations felt almost embarrassing in their simplicity, yet they grounded him in a way success never had. He caught himself looking forward to their conversations, not because they reassured him, but because they stripped him bare in a way no one else dared. One evening, after a particularly long day, he finally asked her why she cared so much, why she invested this level of attention in someone who had mocked her profession with $1 million joke. She paused, considering her answer carefully. She told him about her father, a man who had died because no one took his pain seriously until it was too late, a man who had laughed off his symptoms the same way. She said she had learned then that healing often required patience, humility, and the willingness to be vulnerable. The room felt heavier after that confession, charged with shared understanding. From that day on, he stopped making jokes about money. The offer still hung in the air, unspoken but present, yet it no longer defined their relationship. Instead, something quieter grew between them, mutual respect. As his body responded to the treatment, so did his perspective. He began canceling meetings without guilt, turning off his phone without panic. He even slept through the night, something he hadn't done in years. The tests showed improvement, enough to raise cautious hope, but she reminded him that healing was not linear, that setbacks were part of the journey. When one came, a sudden flare of pain that left him breathless and afraid, he didn't run to another specialist. He called her. That alone surprised him. She guided him through the moment, her voice steady, anchoring him until the pain subsided. When he arrived at the clinic the next day, shaken but alive, he realized something profound had changed. He no longer felt like a powerful man seeking a service. He felt like a human being learning to live again. And somewhere between the measured breaths, the honest conversations, and the discipline he once despised, the impossible began to feel less like a fantasy and more like a quiet promise taking shape inside him. The confirmation came on an ordinary morning, which somehow made it feel even more unreal. There were no dramatic sirens, no sudden rush of nurses, no tense waiting rooms filled with whispered prayers. He sat in the same chair he had occupied so many times before, hands folded, breathing slow and steady, while the screen in front of them displayed numbers and images he had learned to read with cautious skepticism. The doctor beside him studied the results in silence, her expression focused, almost neutral, and for a moment his old fear returned, sharp and familiar. He prepared himself for disappointment, for carefully chosen words that softened bad news. Instead, she turned toward him, and the smallest smile touched her lips, restrained but undeniable. She told him the condition was no longer present, that every indicator pointed to full recovery, that the body which had once betrayed him was now functioning as it should. He didn't respond immediately. His mind lagged behind the words, as if they belonged to someone else. When the meaning finally settled, his chest expanded with a breath so deep it almost hurt, followed by a laugh that escaped him before he could stop it. Raw, shaky, nothing like the confident sound he once used to command rooms. His eyes burned, and he didn't bother hiding it. He stood, pacing the small room, running a hand through his hair, as if movement could help him absorb the impossible truth. For years, he had lived with a countdown ticking somewhere in the background of his life, an invisible clock reminding him that his power had limits. Now, for the first time, that clock was silent. He turned to her, words tumbling out in fragments: gratitude, disbelief, relief, all inadequate. He reached for his wallet out of instinct, then stopped, suddenly aware of how ridiculous the gesture felt in that moment. He remembered his laugh, his million-dollar joke, and felt a flush of embarrassment rise in his cheeks. He told her he wanted to honor his promise, not as a joke this time, but as a debt. He offered more than he had before, a sum large enough to make headlines, to ensure her comfort for life. She listened patiently, then shook her head. Her refusal was gentle but firm. She said healing was not a transaction, that she had done her job, nothing more. The words landed with a weight he hadn't expected. In that instant, he understood how much of his life had been shaped by the belief that everything had a price, including loyalty, care, and love. The realization stung, but it also freed him. He sat back down, suddenly exhausted, yet lighter than he had felt in decades. As he left the clinic, the city seemed different, not quieter or slower, but more vivid. Colors sharpened, sounds layered themselves with new meaning. He noticed people he would have once ignored: a street vendor laughing with a customer, a child tugging at her mother's hand, a man helping a stranger cross the road. These small moments felt profound, as if the world had been waiting for him to truly see it. In the weeks that followed, he didn't rush back into his old life. He eased into it, renegotiating priorities, delegating power, choosing presence over control. He returned to the clinic not as a patient, but as a visitor, bringing coffee, asking after staff, listening to stories. Eventually, he did use his wealth, but differently. He funded research, built facilities, supported programs that offered care without conditions. He insisted they remain accessible to those who had nothing to offer but trust. He never put his name on the building she worked in, respecting her wish for anonymity, but he ensured it would stand long after both of them were gone. Sometimes, late at night, he would place a hand over his chest and feel the steady rhythm beneath his palm, a quiet reminder of how close he had come to losing everything without understanding what mattered. He would remember the laughter, the arrogance, the careless offer of $1 million, and shake his head with a soft smile. The impossible had happened, yes, but not in the way he had imagined. His body had healed, but more importantly, something inside him had been restored, a sense of humility, gratitude, and connection that no amount of money could ever buy.